The book of the Bible we're going to discuss today and talk about is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the fifth book of Moses. Um, One of the things that I learned by watching the television series The Chosen, I am a big fan of The Chosen. There was point where, one episode where I learned something. Now, I haven't gone into great research to make sure that what I learned is actually factual, but I believe it factual. Where in the TV show we saw the character of Jesus talking with the character of John, and in their conversation, they're talking about the Samaritan people and how what a shame it is that they only accept the five books of Moses and nothing else. And so I had not previously been attuned or aware that there was a belief that there were groups of people that were living around them. People that called Samaritan were basically relatives, so it really wasn't a different people, but they treated them as if they were different people. But anyway, that they only believed in the five books of Moses and wouldn't believe anything else were the words of God. If you have watched my other podcast on the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, a lot of the things that I say in those really also applies to Deuteronomy as well. Although there are portions of Deuteronomy that may have been written closer in time to when those events were taking place. We see in the book of the ending of Numbers where the conversation, or where we see Moses selecting Joshua as the next person. But in Deuteronomy, maybe it backs up a little for that, and then we bring Joshua in, and of course the next book of the Bible is in fact Joshua. So when we're looking at Deuteronomy, there are some interesting things to look at. If you remember in our book about, in our discussion about Numbers, we talked about how Moses had given the people another law. Remember, the Jewish people at the time Jesus came, there were my mind just went blank, either 613 or 813 different rules that they had to follow. I'll tag right up here, 613 rules or the 813 rules. Right now, I can't remember which it is. They're both being true in my mind right now. So I'll post that right up here, which is the correct. But anyway, with all the rules that the people had to follow, it's kind of interesting that in the book of Numbers, Moses brings a new law from God. Maybe it's from God, maybe it wasn't. I'm not so sure that everything Moses said was from God was really from God. It's kind of like one of our politicians saying that God told them to do something. Yeah, we're not going to believe that. But anyway, so we learned in the book of Numbers that Moses had brought to them a new law by God, saying that they couldn't marry the women from the people around them as they traveled through and as they wandered around, specifically the Cushite women, although Moses did then go ahead and marry one himself. But when we get to the book of Deuteronomy, we see where Moses tells the people, and he's only talking to the men, because at that point, that's all they really considered as important or valid in their society. And so when he talked to the people, the male portions of his people, he told them, you know, as we're traveling through and you see a woman and you think she's attractive, it's okay. Go ahead and take her as your wife. You can do that. Well, that kind of contradicts kind of the supposed law that he passed down to the people in the book of Numbers, saying they could not do that. So because of this conflict, it further supports my hypothesis that these were not really laws of God. This is just Moses talking out of both sides of his face sometimes. And if he tells the people God said it, then he would get people to believe him. It's kind of like a politician saying that they were sent by God when there's absolutely nothing godly about them. We have that one little thing that seems a little unusual. Another thing that seems unusual is that Moses had to tell his people that they were not allowed to be prostitutes at the shrine. The shrine. I guess that was some sort of like a religious place, maybe where the statue was, or maybe it was a religious gathering. But they were not allowed to be prostitutes. They were not allowed to be a shrine prostitute. So that's kind of like if the preacher had to come to the people and say, you're not allowed to engage in prostitution while you're at church. And I'm thinking like, you can't be a prostitute at the other church down the street either. I'm thinking like, You know, the whole time that I was raising my own children, I never had to sit them down and tell them, okay, I need to tell you, you can't turn tricks at church. So it makes me wonder about this ragtag group of people that Moses was leading. So I'm wondering what happened. I'd almost like to hear the story that goes along with that, where we had kind of the people say you're not allowed to work as a shrine prostitute. So if they're not allowed to work as a shrine prostitute, could they work as a prostitute in the market? I don't know. They were so clear with their language. So it's kind of interesting that they were very specific. He didn't say, you can't be a prostitute. That's not what he said. But anyway, so that's interesting. Another thing in Deuteronomy that I like is there is a model, if you want to put it that way. There is a model for good leadership in there where Moses was telling the people what they were to do as far as going into the land, and his people, although some of their actions and their reasoning behind what they said may not have been so honorable, but they made suggestions, and Moses listened. And a good leader is someone who actually does listen to their people. And so not always do the people have good ideas that are worthy of following, but being open to listening is a good thing. Okay, I want to check my notes here a little bit in the writings I've already made on Deuteronomy, and see if there's anything else that we need to discuss. It's a continued the continued writings and works of Moses. So it's a selecting of the spies going into the land, and he selected 12, one from each tribe. Remember, Joseph's sons each counted as a tribe, so there were 2 from there, and the tribe of Levi it was a tribe, but it didn't hold the same. So when they're talking about the 12 tribes, it's like the 2 tribes from Joseph and not from Levi. Okay. What else do we find in Deuteronomy? The command to love the Lord your God with all your heart. And Jesus comes up behind them and said, but remember, you need to also love your neighbors. At the time I was working on this particular portion of this book, a good friend of mine, Reverend Gigi Rodriguez, would end all of her emails and when she preached or even her posts on Facebook with a little tagline that said, keep it simple, simply love. And I like that. It's not all that complicated, which is kind of interesting because Moses kind of goes overboard with all of the rules for the people, but I don't know. If you had to tell your people they weren't to be prostitutes at church, well, maybe they needed more than 1 or 2 simple rules. It talks about the first concept of tithing, keeping a tenth of what you have, uh, setting aside your profit a tenth. Here it says, if among the captives, the people you capture, well, if you find a beautiful woman and you're attracted, you can take her as your wife. The underlying idea of capturing and taking people, and then just like, these are people you captured, so they are less than you. So if they're pretty, have your way. That's not of God. That may be what the people did, and and there's a lot of people even living today that do things and say and talk about how that's okay. Oh yeah, I wrote a lot more on this. No Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute. So he had to clarify that was for men and women. So there must have been both males and females that were working as a prostitute. Oh, and the scripture said no Israelite man or woman. So if you weren't Israelite and you wanted to be a prostitute at the religious facilities and buildings, I guess that was okay. One thing it doesn't say it was wrong for them to hire or to pay a prostitute, male or female. If this message really came from God, it would have said, no man or woman should participate in sex for money as either the prostitute or the one who pays for the service. That's my final statement on that on page 81 of my book, Deep and Wide, which is what I set aside for February 6th. You have eyes and ears, use them. Boy, do we need that today. We look at the 1580 Christians and the Israelites that were following Moses and wonder how they could have repeatedly been so ignorant. Then the great COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 arrived, and millions of people claiming to be Christians revolted against the scientists and refused to see or hear. Another important scripture. Okay, so that was Deuteronomy. It's a continuation of the books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I kind of in my mind have the idea that maybe Genesis and Job were not written by Moses, and maybe just Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were written by Moses. I don't know who else it would have been that would have written Job or wrote the book of Genesis. Maybe it was a conglomeration of people. And anyway, so we have the 5 books of Moses that maybe only 4 of them were for Moses. If you engage with this content, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching.